Okay, so your team's probably running on Azure DevOps, and you keep hearing all this buzz about GitHub and its wild AI tools. But what really changes in your day to day when you make that move? Well, in this explainer, we're going to cut right through the marketing speak and focus on the two biggest, most important shifts you'll actually feel: how your repositories are structured and how you manage permissions. Let's dive right in. So, yeah, this is probably your world right now. You've got Azure boards for all your planning, Azure repos for your code, and pipelines for CI/CD. It's that classic all-in-one suite. It's been the backbone of enterprise development for what feels like forever. A really familiar, structured place to work. And then this happens. Suddenly, the whole conversation changes. All you hear about is GitHub Copilot, automatic code fixes, this whole new wave of AI-powered development that promises to make everyone way more productive. And you kind of start to wonder, wait, are we missing out? Because all that cool new stuff, it's happening on GitHub. And that is the billion-dollar question, right? It's not just about pointing your Git remote to a new URL. Moving to GitHub is a fundamental shift in how your team organizes its work, how it manages who can do what, and even how you think about governance. And that is exactly what we are going to unpack here. This quote right here, it absolutely nails the reality of the situation today. See, Microsoft isn't really pitting these two against each other anymore. They're positioning them as a tag team, where each one has its own specific job. And if you can get your head around this one idea, everything else we're about to talk about is going to make perfect sense. So to really understand the workflow changes, we've got to first look at the DNA of these two platforms. I mean, yeah, they're both owned by Microsoft now, but they come from completely different worlds. And that history, that heritage, it really shapes everything about how they operate. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Over on the left, you've got Azure DevOps. It literally evolved from Team Foundation Server. You might know it as TFS. It was built from the ground up for big companies that needed serious governance, traceability, and structured processes. But on the right, you've got GitHub. It grew up in the open source community, where everything was about developer experience and collaboration. And now, it's where Microsoft is pouring all of its AI development money. Two very different philosophies. Okay, let's get into our first major workflow shift, and trust me, this one's a biggie. It's the fundamental way that repositories are organized. This is probably the single biggest structural change your team is going to feel. In Azure DevOps, like you see on the left, everything has to live inside a team project. That project is like a walled garden, a hard container that isolates your repos, your pipelines, your work items. But in GitHub, poof, that middle container, the team project, just doesn't exist. Your repos live directly inside the organization. And this flatter structure is totally intentional. It's designed to make it easy to discover and reuse code across different teams. I love this metaphor. It makes the whole concept crystal clear. Think about it. Azure DevOps gives every team their own private, locked-off floor in an office building. GitHub, on the other hand, it gives every project its own building on a big open tech campus. It's way easier to walk around and see what other teams are building, and that naturally encourages a culture of inner sourcing. Okay, so that was structure. Now let's talk about the second major shift, which is less about structure and more about, well, philosophy. We're talking about moving from managing rules in a graphical interface to defining those rules as code, right there alongside your app's source code. So on the left is the world you probably know, Azure DevOps branch policies. It's this super powerful UI where an admin clicks through a bunch of menus to set up all the rules. Now, GitHub has something similar called branch protection rules, but it also unlocks this really powerful new way of thinking, putting that governance power directly into the hands of your developers. And that new way of thinking is embodied in the code owners file. This is literally just a simple text file that you check into your repository. And inside it, you can say things like, hey, any changes to the database folder must be reviewed by the database team. It completely shifts ownership from some central administrator to the team that actually owns the code. This is a massive, massive change to your workflow. So with all these big differences, you're probably wondering, how do we actually make this move without breaking everything? Well, it turns out you don't have to boil the ocean. Microsoft's recommended path is actually a hybrid approach that lets you get the best of both worlds. And here is the playbook for that hybrid model. Step 1 is super simple. You just connect your existing Azure boards to your new GitHub repositories. Then step 2 is where the magic happens. You migrate your code over to GitHub so you can unlock all those amazing AI and developer tools. Then you just keep using Azure boards for what it's great at, enterprise-level planning, while your developers get to live in the modern, slick workflow of GitHub. And here is the absolute clincher, the part that gets the budget approved: the cost. For most companies that are already in the Microsoft ecosystem, this hybrid strategy can be, believe it or not, basically free. Your GitHub Enterprise licenses often already include the necessary Azure DevOps access. This is not a small detail. It's a huge financial greenlight that makes this whole thing possible for a lot of organizations. All right, let's get real for a minute and talk about what a migration actually feels like on the ground. It's not just one big event, it's a process, and the amount of effort changes wildly depending on what you're trying to move. So let's set some clear expectations. This cheat sheet tells the whole story. Migrating your Git repos? That's the easy part. The history, the branches, the tags, it all comes over pretty cleanly with the official tools. The pipelines, though, that's a high-effort job. The YAML is just different, so you're talking about a rewrite, not a quick copy-paste. But the hardest part, by a country mile, is migrating work items. The data models are just completely different, which is exactly why most teams just keep Azure boards and go for that hybrid model we talked about. And this quote just hammers the point home. Seriously, don't fall into the big bang migration trap. The smart, low-risk way to do this is to move your code first to get those sweet AI benefits, keep the project management tools that already work for you, and start thinking of this hybrid model not as a temporary bridge, but as the final, stable destination. So we'll leave you with this question. Moving to GitHub, it's not just about changing where your code is stored. It's about moving your code and your team into an AI-native world. So the real question isn't if you're going to move your files, but if you're preparing your team's culture and workflows to actually take full advantage of what this new world has to offer. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.